Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's discussion. And thank you for joining the Sutton community as we listen to what will hopefully be a valuable and unfortunately much needed conversation. So I deeply believe that it's unfortunate that it's taken to this point with way too many going through so much continuous pain and suffering to bring us to this conversation, to bring us some awareness to the fact that we need to be taking a good, hard look at ourselves, our communities, and society in general. As issues surrounding acceptance in general, but racism, and more specifically in the BAME community, it shows up in so many different ways, and additionally it affects different individuals in different ways. So there are many different views and perspectives on the matter. Therefore, the purpose of this evening, the way I see it, is it's not to be a representative panel for this wide-reaching community, but rather to have an open and honest conversation with telling of personal experiences, perspectives, and concerns. So I see my position here not as an interviewer, but rather one of a listener looking to gain a deeper, broader understanding of this matter, ultimately with the view of making this world a better, more accepting, and less judgmental place. My questions, therefore, do not necessarily reflect my own personal opinions, but rather pointed to deepen our understanding. And likewise, I would urge those of you listening in to temporarily clear your minds of personal thoughts, and especially thinking around this particular topic, and just listen from that common neutral space of wisdom and love. So that brings us to our guest this evening. Firstly, we have with us Yishai Joseph of Essex.
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
He's an motivational speaker and activist, and he's actually the one that was behind much of this happening tonight. So thank you for your efforts and part of this.
You're welcome.
Secondly, we have with us Michael Mullings, who is a teacher and educator at Hasmonean School here in London. And he is a member with his family of the Bournemouth and Elstree United Synagogue community. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Next up, we have Mordechai Yosef ben Avraham, who grew up in Calabasas in LA. And he is currently a rabbinic trainee at Or Sameach in Jerusalem, as well as a teacher on the Or Lagola training program. Thank you for joining us, Mordechai.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, I'm not, Or Sameach doesn't do a Smicha program. I'm learning there, but I'm doing a Smicha outside of Or Sameach in Bnei Brak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And we had, I'm not sure where he's gone. Hopefully he'll be joining us again shortly. Last but by no means least, Yishai Levine, who is originally from the now infamous Minneapolis. And he's a musical artist that goes under the name of L'chaim OG. Check him out. And he's also currently living in the holy city of Jerusalem. Let's hope he rejoins us soon. I want to start with you, Michael.
Okay.
So you grew up in an Afro-Caribbean family in Camden, if I'm correct. And I want to hear a little bit more, if you care to share. What were your experiences growing up as a person of color, maybe like through childhood up until joining the Jewish community? I know it's kind of a large time frame. But maybe some specific details which you find, which you feel would be helpful for us.
Okay. Firstly, before we start, I'd just like to say thank God, Baruch Hashem, that we have this opportunity to share with the community our experiences, and by the grace of God, we're all here healthy, and hopefully we can enlighten and share our expertise with regard to the circumstance. So my experience as a young person growing up in Camden Town, it was interesting because I lived in a predominantly white area. It was predominantly white. So most of my neighbors, we were one of maybe 4 or 5 black people within a 2 or 3 mile radius. It was quite a predominantly white area. And we lived in a 3-floor house. We had a garden. and automatically it kind of qualified us as being distinctive from a lot of the majority of the people in the area. There was a huge estate, a huge council estate, not 100, 200 meters across the street, and I think that's one of the things about London. I mean, you know, there are London is, you can't necessarily, they don't have the delineation between of wealth as might be seen in other cities. You know, you've got really, I remember that around the corner from my house we had houses that were worth £4 million, and then around just over the road, as I said, about not more than 200 yards away, there was a council estate, and obviously as council estates go, it was pretty rough. So the council estate was mostly white, Caucasian, and I can say that many of the inhabitants didn't really take well to our living conditions, that we had significantly, I'd say, more comfortable a lifestyle than others. So naturally their sort of treatment was quite negative. So growing up, we used to what we call play out, which was go play games in the local park and what have you, and you know, having throwaway comments like the N word was used a few times, and loads of different racial slurs. And we learned very quickly that there are some places that we shouldn't be playing in. And as a young man, sort of a teenager, there were various different incidents of racial, how would you say, racial, I wouldn't say attacks, but racial language, racially motivated behavior, I think is probably the nicest way to put it. And all in all, it was quite strange for me, because I'd never been taught, or I'd never been brought up to believe that I was any less different to anyone else. So, like as I say, I grew up in a family that prided themselves in education, and we had a very, very strong sort of matriarchal model. And we were brought up to believe that we were equal to everyone. So it was really surprising to me when I went with a really good friend of mine. You know, he was privately educated. I went with a really good friend of mine to, I can't remember which department store. I won't name it because obviously it could be held in libel. But, and, you know, I was stopped at the department store and he had absolutely no problems walking. I couldn't understand what was going on because I had exactly the same rights, surely. And that was sort of my experience for many of the things that happened to me at that age. It was trying to understand why, if I'd been told that I was the same, why was I not being treated the same? So that was essentially a lot of my experience as a youth. It was trying to work out how I fit in this world, which was supposed to be a world where I belonged. But as I got older, I was feeling less and less like I belonged there.
I can only imagine for a young child to kind of have to go through that. What did it mean to you then?
Sorry, be specific. What does?
Well, kind of like you said, having grown up in a family circle where you weren't perhaps aware at an earlier stage of the inequality that society kind of faced you with. When you did come across it, what were your reactions to that?
There was a fair amount of incredulity. I couldn't quite understand whether I was mad or the world was mad. You know, it was really quite difficult for me to comprehend, because it was like the world around me as I knew it was collapsing and I didn't know what to do. The only thing that was a staple was thank God. My belief in God and my faith in God never changed, never shook. And I think that's probably what carried me through, because everything else was shattered. You know, my idea of the world, and I had to basically break down and then rebuild an ideology of the world as I knew it. And it was a very difficult and painful time, to be honest. So that's how I responded to it. You know, I responded by drawing really close to my faith, but taking stock and just realigning myself with the way of the world, which sounds terrible, but that's, you know, that's all the only thing I had to do. I mean, it's the only offer I had. You know, it's the only thing I could do at my disposal. Goodness.
I want to move over to Jodeci here. So you weren't originally from Ganzil, and you grew up at the first part of your childhood in a different area, and you kind of moved over kind of after finding out you were Jewish. So would you share with us a little bit about your early childhood and kind of your experiences through that?
Thank you. So basically, before I moved over to Gants Hill, Ilford, which was in 2008 and 2009 was the fastest growing Jewish community at the time, I grew up as a Christian. I thought I was a Christian in Plumstead, and there was no Jewish environment around. And when I found out I was Jewish, it was a big surprise to me. I didn't even know what Judaism was, and my color wasn't really a thing because I grew up in a Christian society. I didn't really think about my color. So when my mum told me I was Jewish and moved me over to the fastest growing Jewish community at the time, I was pretty shocked. And I remember walking into this Orthodox primary school for the first time. I was in year 6. I started when I was 10, so that's like the last year of primary school. And I remember walking into this school with my siblings, and we were the only black kids in this Orthodox school. And I remember thinking to myself, it literally, the whole playground stopped and stared at us. And it honestly felt like a UFO, like an alien spaceship had just dropped me and my siblings in the school. Like everyone stared. I saw people with these things on their heads, and it was very interesting because I did experience a lot of racism in school because a lot of kids didn't know that there were black Jews around. They didn't know what black was. I got called a few names in the first year, and I always felt like I was justifying myself to be more Jewish, and that's how. I know, Michael, you were saying you reacted with it in like in your mind, and that you always had faith in God, but I didn't really believe in God at the time, and I reacted it in a way of like, I have to prove myself now. I have to do more to justify my Judaism. I have to be super confident. I have to show off. I have to justify my black Jewish identity. So that was kind of how I dealt with it. I kind of rebelled inside and said, you know what? If you're not going to treat me nicely, I'm going to become this haughty person that only cares about one thing. So I had some tough experiences when I went to King Solomon. I was one of the only black kids there as well. And it's hard being alone because it's like, people don't really understand me fully. Like they understand my background and the comments I got, and I always felt different in a way. And I didn't know how to cope with that, if you understand. I'm sure other people on this call can understand that.
So I want to come back to that because I feel the topic of racism within or lack of acceptance in general within the educational institutions is an important topic to talk about. I want to ask you though, specifically Michael and Jodeci, slightly broader question with regards to the United Kingdom. In your view, how equal do you feel this country is? I mean, if I would give you a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is full equality and 1 is persecution, where would you put our country today?
Go on, Michael.
I think as long as you are the accepted version of black, and by that I mean as long as you put yourself across in a manner which doesn't offend the vast majority, then you can reach the proverbial glass ceiling of about 4 or 5. You're allowed to take part in certain ventures. We'll allow you to be a part of the opera. We'll allow you to be part of our, our small societies. But we don't really want you going any further than that. We don't want to change the status quo. So as long as you can present yourself in a certain type of way, I think you're allowed to get so far. But there is a very, very clear, I say glass, but it's quite concrete. I mean, you can't pass this ceiling. It's a very, very clear ceiling, and it doesn't get higher than a 4, maybe a 5 maximum.
That's low. That's low.
In my view, I'm a bit higher than Michael. I agree with you that there are certain pockets of black communities in the UK, and there's an attainment gap definitely between the BAME group and the rest of society. I definitely think that is, but I don't know how it's like in America. But from what I've seen in America, I'm very grateful to be living in England and the way we're treated in England, to have the opportunity we have, and I haven't really seen so much police. I never ever, thank God, experienced police brutality or seen it. So I'm giving it a 7 or 8. I do feel happy in England as a black Jew. I do definitely feel there's still, because Britain, remember, was built on colonialism. I definitely still there's that mentality of privilege. Our government, look at our government. Do they really represent everyone? We've got a long way to go. But in terms of me as a young black man, do I think I can make it in England? 100%.
Let me challenge that because you're comparing yourself to America, and with all respect, America is not the standard that you should. It's like comparing a meter ruler to a millimeter or a nanometer ruler. I mean, we're talking here about a basic standard of rights and a basic standard of treatment. So if we're talking about the gold standard, which is to be a white man, a white English man, if you compare yourself to that gold standard, how do you think you compare? And I think we don't get further than 5. I think there are certain things that you just don't. I mean, I'll give you one example if you don't mind me going on, because obviously there are other guys, and I'll give you one example. A very good friend of mine, was talking about booking his holidays, and I don't know if people know outside the black community, but when you book a holiday, there are black websites that tell you which countries you can go to, which are going to be most receptive to you as a person. So you actually have a limited places that you can travel based on your skin color, which has nothing to do with you. I mean, you didn't choose your skin color; you're black by default. So if we think about that as a comparison, we are limited on something as simple as travel. We're limited on travel based on the color of our skin. There are some places that you can go there with all intention, but the reality is the experience there is not overwhelmingly positive, and therefore, if we're comparing the standards, I've got to say that from a standards point of view, the standards that we have, or the opportunities, the freedoms, are very much more reduced than others. Others have a much more liberal existence.
Michael, do you feel that's changed somewhat in it's not, that doesn't seem like it's the right direction that we're going in, but do you feel that at least we've started on the right direction since maybe when you were in university to where we are today in the 21st century?
If I use an analogy, I feel like it's almost like things on a, if I can use class levels, things on the sort of the lower and the middle class are slowly being challenged, and there is some movement, there are some acceptable changes being made, and some what do we call these lists that are only restricted to a certain type of people to encourage. Oxbridge have got these lists that are trying to encourage people to go to Oxford, and so there are some things happening, but at the highest level there has been no change, and it's reflected in so many different areas. I mean, I was watching something in the American football about American coaches and American football players, and there's something like ridiculous, like something I think it's 90% of American footballers NFL, 90% of the NFL come from are African American, and 3 coaches, which make less than 1%, are African American. Now, the NFL, as far as I know, I'm not an expert, but the NFL has been going a very long time. And if you're saying that in however long it's been, there have been no qualified coaches of ethnic minority, I'd have to challenge that. So when we talk about things getting better, I don't necessarily think they have got better. I think on a certain level, yes, you may see more couples that are mixed, and you may see more people on TV that are mixed and so on. But behind the scenes, in the infrastructure, the government, the places that matter, are there people of representation, proportional representation? I don't think there is. So no, I don't think things have got significantly better.
And Mordechai, let's kind of take this scale over to America. Jodeci reflected his experience compared to the USA. Where do you feel they are on this scale?
I think one of the big differences between the United States and the UK is the economic system. We have a tremendous amount of economic mobility here in the United States. And if you look at America for where it started at in terms of being a place where people of color were not considered fully human, to the point of it being illegal for Black and white people to get married, and you look at the society that we have today, it's really reflective of really the greatness of the system, and there's a tremendous amount of progression that we still have to go, because there's something in all of our minds, regardless of what your race is, that there should be some form of a perfected reality, that there should be, a place where everyone is equal. Where does such an idea come from? You know what I mean? Like, there's been really nowhere on planet Earth, since I know of, maybe there's a historian that could let me out, where there was a society where everybody felt equal and everybody had their needs met and everybody. So what is it inside of us that has this desire for this perfect reality? And so, there's a world as it is, and there's a world as it should be. And I think if we look at the world as it is, we have made tremendous accomplishments. And when you think about the African American community, it's like, yeah, we have a tremendous voice, right? Like, we have a tremendous voice, and we're everywhere. And our story is one of the most famous stories of any group of people, maybe in our century. But we only make up 13% of the population, and so, like, when we look at a lot of the the issues that exist in America, there was a time where, you know, there were people that where it was race and there was hatred and there was a very divisiveness. But I think today in America, I think it's more about class. You know, I think people who are in the lower economic environments, regardless if they're black, white, Hispanic, you know, are all suffering. And I think that's one of the failures of our economic system, is that the people who are poor and disenfranchised get taken advantage of in our criminal justice system. You know, the law enforcement, you know, I think one of the things with Corona, we could see clearly that, you know, regardless of where you're at in the world, you know, poor people are treated a certain way, and middle class and upper middle class people are treated a certain way in certain neighborhoods. So I think, you know, like, you know, our country's made tremendous strides, and I think what you see now, even in this generation, you know, we're coming off of post-Obama, you know, and a lot of people criticize Obama, say, oh, well, he didn't do enough for black people. But what Obama did for the mindset of African Americans, just America as a whole, he created a mechanism or ideology or inspiration that I can do anything. And so what you're seeing now in America, even though it does have similar reminiscences to, say, the Watts riots and the Harlem riots and all different types of issues that have happened, you know, in America, I think if you listen to the new generation now, and I think I talked about this with you, Rabbi Shmully, is that the leadership in America has shifted in the black community. Before it was, you know, preachers and politicians and maybe even community activists, and now you see business leaders like the Jay-Z's and the Kanye Wests and the LeBron James and other business, Bob Johnson, you know, owner BET, and all these different types of personalities. And so I think more what you see now is a desire for greater economics, a desire for more control, more influence, and more power, you know, as people. And I think that's something that the rest of the world could really learn a lot from. But, you know, we still have a long ways to go.
So what were your personal experience kind of growing up? I mean, you grew up in LA, which is supposedly a more liberal viewed city. You know, it's just, and what was it like? What was it like growing up as a person of color in LA?
Yeah, it was. I mean, you had a duality of it, because, you know, the area that we grew up in was very similar to Michael. You know, it was a very nice area, a lot of very successful people. In fact, the place where I lived at, like you have, like, say you have Beverly Hills, everyone knows about Beverly Hills, and then you have where I lived at in Calabasas, and we were kind of like rivals growing up. Like, you know, we were, oh, we're going to a Beverly Hills party tonight, but the difference is that Beverly Hills was considered like old money, and then, you know, Calabasas was considered new money. So you had a lot of entertainers, you had a lot of executives who didn't want to live in the city, moved out to where I was at. So you had that environment, but at the same time, you had places like South Central Los Angeles, you have places like Watts, you have Nickerson Garden, you have all these very impoverished areas in the United States. I mean, in Los Angeles. So there's that duality of, I live in this environment, but if I just drove a little bit over, you know, I'm in the same pool as any other African American man who lives in this environment. And I just, you know, did an interview recently about it. You know, I always talk about, like, you know, growing up, my dad, you know, he didn't grow up with the most economics, you know what I mean? Like my grandfather, Edward Doherty, he went to the Korean War, he served in the military, he came home and he was like washing dishes and working at cleaner places, but he made enough money that allowed my father to go to college. And my dad went to college and he got a degree, and he eventually got an insurance business and did very well. And, you know, similar, you know, to my mom, you know, my mom's mother was a teacher, but my mom, you know, eventually became a professor, and she teaches all over the world. And so I grew up with parents like on the going up, you know, across the board. But, you know, my dad got me a very expensive car. You know, I think he was kind of like living through me a little bit, you know, and I think one of the things he said to me, he told me, he's like, you know, I'm giving you this car so you don't spend your whole life trying to get this car, you know. And I think that was part of the Lego blocks that led me to like getting more on a spiritual path, because I had so much materialism. I knew what it was. But the point is, I have been pulled over, you know, in my car. You know, I have been racially profiled. You know, I have, had those experiences, late at night, cops, saying like, oh, how this is your car, or you live in this neighborhood, and those types of things. So you do have that reality, and I'll say like, there's a very big survival component, to growing up as an African American, no matter what your economic status is that there's gangs out there where you could be identified. There's police you could be identified. The school system, isn't, you have a guy, African American male, who's like 6'3" and 200 and something pounds. That image, I mean, you got to think about like hip hop, and we like there's a lot of factors. It's like the whole hip hop imagery, was something that was used to really justify a lot of the legislation that the Clintons and other liberal groups wanted to bring into act, that basically made it okay to lock up young black kids, and put them in jail, because now prison is now a big business, and people are making billions of dollars from it. So there's a lot of issues like welfare, like African Americans didn't come together and say like, all of a sudden we've been self-sufficient, we've had our own insular economy, and now we want to be on welfare and we want to break up the family. We never came up with that. Drugs inside of the community, we never went out and did deals with the Colombians and the people in Mexico. We never lobbied to have weak borders for drugs to be transmitted into our communities. That had nothing to do with us. And then you think about the whole concept of hip hop, like the way that corporate America has took, and a lot of the companies, Kanye West talks a lot about this, a lot of the companies that own record companies also own privately owned prisons. So they were basically feeding the psychology that led to kids thinking, being a rapper, or being a basketball player, and these types of things. And if you don't make it that way, you become a drug dealer, And so that thinking process wasn't something that my grandparents grew up with, or even my parents grew up with. My parents grew up in a time of the 60s and 70s where black people were intellectuals and they were fighting for justice, and they were creating groups. They weren't creating Crips and Bloods. They were creating things like the Black Panthers and other things. So anyway, so I just think there's a lot of factors that created the environment that you see today, where you have young black kids that sell drugs and make it justifiable for police to, be almost brutal.
So Mordechai, growing up in a slightly kind of wealthier family, or higher lifestyle family, did you still find that your opportunities as a person of color were limited?
I think, that was a beautiful question, because I think this is a huge concept. And I think what makes the Jewish experience much different than just the African American experience, because in Judaism, we're taught that God creates every single experience that I have in my life. We walk into a room, we kiss a mezuzah. That room is a new reality, in essence. And it's like, where's our kavana when we walk, or what's our thinking process when we walk into that room? And so I think one of the things that the society has done to cripple African Americans is to create like this victim concept, this victim mentality, meaning that like, okay, any challenge that I have in business, I don't know if you guys remember years ago, Bill Gates, Microsoft, during the time of the Bush administration, they wanted to break Microsoft up. They said they had a monopoly. They wanted to break it up into 3 parts, whatever. And so Bill Gates, they fought, and eventually, they overturned it. But imagine if Bill Gates was a black person, and all these companies came against him to want to break up his corporation. People would be like, look how racist they are. They're racist. They don't want to see a black man rich. They don't want to see him successful in this whole thing. And so the reality is like anyone who is moving up in the economic world is going to have a tremendous amount of challenges, a tremendous amount of resistance. There's been inventors throughout history that have had new innovations, and some of them even have lost their lives because of the disruption they were creating. So I think the challenges is how do I see the challenges that I experience in life as something given to me as God? Like I grew up as a person of color in America. That has a set of challenges, but that's not to think that the guy who's white that I grew up with, he had challenges too, maybe different ones, and the guy who's Hispanic, he had different challenges, and the guy who's Asian has different challenges, and women too, for everybody out there, women have challenges too. But the point is just saying that the point is just saying that when I look at my challenges as something by God, then I could critically look at the fact that everything I experience as being something of racism. I could sit back and say, like, you know what, maybe it is, maybe that person does have a thought or whatever, but I can overcome this challenge and I can accomplish anything that comes in my mind because God puts every thought into my mind. And so any ambition that I have, you know, that I never heard my dad make excuses. You know, he had an insurance company and he was going up against Equitable and Transamerica, huge insurance companies, and he succeeded, you know, and he made a lot of money and he put us in great environments and great schools. But I never heard him come home and say, like, oh, well, they're trying to stop me because I'm black. No, the people are against because I'm changing the paradigm. And the same thing would exist for an Asian man or anything. So I think just getting out of this like victim mentality, and then when we come into the Jewish world, you know, if I have a challenge with somebody, or if I have a challenge with a rabbi, or if I have a challenge with the institution, or I have a challenge with getting my kids in a particular school, racism, no, it's a challenge. Now, maybe it is. I mean, maybe it could be that individual may be racist. Fine, fair enough. But that challenge came from Hashem. And so I think the power of Judaism and why the Jewish people have been able to endure for so long, for thousands of years, because even whether it was in Germany, whether it was in Spain, whether it was through different pogroms throughout Europe and different issues, they said it's from Hashem and it has something to do with us and working on ourselves and who we are as people, and they've been able to persevere. So I think the Jewish perspective is something that's very needed with people in color, which is everything comes from Hashem, and I have the power to overcome it no matter who the force in front of me is.
That's really powerful. That is really powerful. Let me throw this back at you quickly. Like, does that deduct or detract from the issues of racism? I mean, as a society, shouldn't we be looking that way to see what the problem is so that we can look to do better?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said before, I said, like, for some reason Hashem put inside of the heads of most people around the world that we should live in a society where we are all connected and everyone is taken care of and everyone is safe and everyone does have the freedom to do what they want. And those things, and we're not there yet. But I think to make it about the stem, like based racism, I think that it is true, but it's not the full picture, you know. And I think, you know, like, for example, in America, when you talk about police brutality is not just affecting black people, it's affecting white people too. You know, poor white people and poor Hispanic people, and they're being killed by cops too, and they're having excessive force too as well by police officers. And when the Donald Trump supporters and the Black Lives Matter supporters unite together, now they're going to have numbers and energy to be able to actually put legislation into action and be able to change the system. But as long as I make it about me and my group, how am I going to be successful? You know, because in a bureaucracy, you need numbers, right? You need people. But if you look at it, Black Lives Matters and Donald Trump supporters are both saying they both have been left out of America. They both have been left out of the economic insurge of all the financial growth. The companies that their grandparents built, Ford and GM and Procter & Gamble, all these companies left and went overseas, left all these people behind. And that's why Donald Trump got elected, was from that basis. But the interests of these two groups of people that are disenfranchised and considered blue collar, lower economic, they have the same exact issues, and it's the color context that makes us think that we're different, and that's what's blocking us.
Zachary, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, we can't see you great. Let me try throw this at you. So you grew up in Minneapolis, which is kind of a different area to LA in many ways. What was it like for you growing up there?
Oh, for sure. Well, you know, I want to start off with a couple of disclaimers. You know, I don't think any person is authorized to be the spokesperson of an entire group of people or entire set of experiences. I also don't think it's fruitful state or set of, although I'm saying everyone else's, you know, there's certainly my truth, yet and still I think the overall goal is a greater clarity and a greater set of deliverables to try to move things forward in a positive way. I think the Torah provides that framework. And so I think that that's the basis. That said, I couldn't be happier to be a part of this chat, as I think my perspectives do widely differ. I was born and raised in Minneapolis, from a circle of people that have made, I think, monumental contributions, but never from the lens of an individual perspective and solely from a village perspective, which I think is one thing that the Jewish culture and faith and Torah principles reinforce, that is sort of the standard, not if one person's okay or if one person and their children are okay. With people being right to the nations would stem from sort of that perspective. So I was born and raised in North Minneapolis, a place that's been on the news right now due to the loss of life, a place that's been on the news before due to the loss of life of another individual by the hands of the police. I've lost a few people close to me at the hands of the police course of years. And again, everything happens from Hashem. Gamzala Tova, talks about not putting a stumbling block in front of another. I think the Gemara speaks to, if you have an animal that has gored someone, you're responsible to make that person whole. If you have an animal that's gored someone and they gore them again, there's even greater responsibility. So I think that in the spirit of moving things forward and healing, there still is a responsibility for reconciliation. And if one really does want to move forward, reconciliation should be something they're looking forward to, and acts and gestures of kindness and support, which the Torah says, support the widow, the orphan, support the ger, support the stranger. I mean, all those things are Torah principles that I think that if we get back to a Torah-based value system, a Torah-based perspective on things, the solutions are there for us. The work to get there, we're rewarded in Shemayim. So I don't know if that was the exact answer you wanted, but it's definitely, my perspective. And I think Minneapolis helped me deal with that. I did come from a very area with a certain set of challenges. The prideful thing I feel about where I'm from is we have an adage, NFL, North Side for life, no free lunches, never forget loyalty. I think those are principles that speak to the fact of, never forget where you came from. Moshe Rabbeinu had a very storied journey, but all throughout that journey, it was mindful in the decisions and the choices he made, and the notion of everything comes with a cost. So if you're going to take, make sure that you've invested and given back to those who have supported you to where you've arrived.
I know this might seem like an obvious question, Zachariah, but I feel there's a lot more for us to see in this. What has it taken for us to come to where we are today? What's kind of the backstory, and especially in the eyes of kind of the circle that you grew up in? How do they see the situation, not where we are today, but kind of up until here from back in the day?
The Torah laid out a journey of
You keep cutting off.
I think we may have lost him.
Yeah. So while we're waiting for him to come back, let me ask you this, Michael. Have you experienced more prejudice as a Jew?
I'm working.
You're back with us, Harry?
I don't think I heard your. Yeah, I am. I'm trying to sign in a different way.
So let me ask it. Let me put this question to Michael, and please God, we'll get back to you shortly. Michael, since coming to Judaism, would you say you've experienced more prejudice as a person of color or as a Jew, or what's wrong with that question?
No, not at all. essentially it's been I gave a talk at our local teachers convention for the union, and I said to the members of the union, with regard to anti-Semitism, I said, as an adult of color, and no, as a black man, it's adults of color business. As a black man, I have I've experienced some racism. You know, I don't get much as a black man, to be honest, because thank God I grew a bit bigger and people think twice before they say things. I guess out of fear of reprimand, but people seem to have no filter when it comes to being Jewish. I mean, it's like it's open season. I said to a close friend of mine, I don't understand it because I'm still the same black man, but there's a confidence that takes me by surprise. I'm walking down the street and we had kids giving us Nazi salutes across the road on a Shabbos, and you know, there's so many different, and there's this confidence which is actually that, you know, being Jewish is something that we can take the mick out of. And that has been surprising for me because I did not expect that. I did not expect to be, you know, to go from the frying pan into the fire, so to speak.
Jodeci, what would you add anything to this?
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Mordechai. He's always got my back. Yeshiva together. I've actually had a lot of interesting experiences in the UK Jewish community. I'm very grateful because, like being born Jewish, I grew up in the Jewish community for like a lot of my life, and I've kind of, you know, after the first few years in school, people got used to me, so it wasn't so much of an issue. But when I started to become more religious later on in life, I started to get involved in Golders Green and different communities. I've had a variety of occasions. One being a few years on Simchat Torah, that the security guard looked at me and my brother and told us we weren't Jewish and we couldn't come in. And all my white friends that were coming to the event, they all just let in straight away. And we couldn't actually get in. We didn't actually get in that night. We went home. Obviously, my mom complained, and there was a whole thing. There was another occasion at a synagogue synagogue that I've been to many times, and there was a new security guard, and he made me wait outside, and all the other people were walking in. It's very, very embarrassing to me. On top of that, that's just a security issue. But a lot of times when I go into shuls, people asking me my whole story. I understand that people want maybe some inspiration. People don't know. But for me, I do like public speaking. I do like talking about myself, and I do like being in the front quite a lot of the time. But I think every single occasion to constantly have to justify my Judaism to people, I feel like there are certain issues in the UK Jewish community that need to be addressed. I feel like there needs to be a certain sensitivity towards people's stories. I don't know. Maybe if a white person came in who was new to synagogue, I don't know how many people would be like, "What's your story? Tell me about your life. Tell me, how did you get into Judaism? How did you become Jewish? All these things, all these assumptions people make, and I think there's just a sensitivity that needs to. If this chat can cause one person to have a greater awareness and make someone feel welcome. Like if I walk into I don't want to feel anxious every time I go to a new synagogue in the UK. I'm okay with the communities I'm involved in because everyone knows me, but it's like I don't want to walk to a new shul and feel anxiety in my heart. Number one, from security. Number two, from people questioning me in shul. I understand if the rabbi wants to know if I'm Jewish because of there's certain people I understand need to know, but there's a certain social etiquette that I think needs to be introduced, and people need to be made aware. And finally, I do think from a rabbi's perspective, I think there needs to be more sermons and more speeches on accepting people who are black into the community. You know, Zipporah, Moses' wife, was black, and she was one of the most holiest person in the Torah. And I don't think there's any Torah grounds for anyone who's black to be made to feel not welcome. I understand in terms of denominations, there's discussions, there's so many issues around different topics, but when it comes to the skin color, I remember just the other day I was I asked Nissim Black a question. I think a lot of you guys know Nissim Black, but his answer amazed me. I asked him, how do you get over this like labeling yourself as a black Jew? Like, how do you get over just in the Jewish community, just kind of not playing the victim mentality, or kind of not what Mordechai was talking about, that victim mentality of like, I need to do more to be Jewish. I'm a victim. And he said to me, everyone has a connection with Hashem. Do you know what I mean? Everyone has a connection with Hashem. So what's been getting me through is that Hashem made me and created me as a Jew, and I have a connection with Hashem, and that's what gets me through every day. Is that I have a right to be Jewish, and wherever I go, I won't let it stop me. I will never not go to a shul, no matter how embarrassed I feel. And I think that's how I'm trying to be a representative to the community. It's just that's how I've dealt with it. But I have experienced a lot of racism over my time in England, which I think needs to change.
I completely agree with you. I think irrelevant of where society are holding, we as a Jewish people should definitely be way ahead on this. Our beliefs that Torah teaches us, and just common sense, about accepting everybody and about seeing everybody for being B'Tselem Elokim, being created in the image of God, irrespective on anything else. We as a Jewish community should be way ahead of this. Michael, have you experienced kind of similar experiences within the Jewish community?
Can I just ask the question why? You say that as a community why should we be way ahead of this?
I think everybody should. But I think especially the Jewish people, we shouldn't be tagging along with we should be looking ahead, irrespective of where society sees things, right or wrong.
Can I just add to that? I also think as a community that's been prosecuted for thousands of years based on our ethnicity, we have been thrown out of places. Vahisha Amda talks about how God's always saved us. The Romans, the Greeks, they're not here, we're here. I think we have an extra responsibility to make our people feel welcome. No matter race, we should be, even from our own experiences, more recently the Holocaust, we have an extra responsibility to our own people to make us feel welcome, because we were the ones that have always been persecuted against. We have so how can we make our own people feel persecuted or discriminated when we've been discriminated for years? We have to make people feel extra welcome. That's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you're right, Michael. Ultimately, I mean, society as well as us, we should be all on the same line, and that is way ahead of where we are today. And we should be on the ultimate line of full equality. The point I'm kind of speaking to is that we as a Jewish people have values that we're taught, and we have values that we should be leading our lives with, which should put us ahead if society are behind on something.
I think that kind of, for me, that speaks to, if I can be so bold as to say, that speaks to a slight anti-Semitic narrative, because here we're trying to hold people to a higher standard than others, and I don't necessarily think that's fair. I think we need to understand that we're dealing with people. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we can bring Torah verses, we can talk Torah, and we can speak about these things, but we're talking about people at the end of the day. We know we heard a few weeks ago that at Mount Sinai, we were worshipping the golden calf. Within minutes, we were worshipping the golden calf. We are people, the same people that were at Mount Sinai. We can't expect. We can encourage, we can educate, but the idea of saying you should be better because you read the Torah, and I'm not sure that's a standard that we can hold people for. I'm not sure that's fair, because I think if a lot of us took a look at ourselves, I think we'll be falling very far short of the golden standard, the standard of the Torah. So I think from that perspective, I think the direct question and the direct answer is yes. I've experienced racism, but you see, I have a different understanding of racism. For me, there are different types of racism. There is ignorance. There is ignorance. So when somebody comes up to me in one of the kosher shops and says, "Oh, wagwan," yes, and I'm like, well, that's just ignorance. Because firstly, how does he know that I'm from that specific part of the West Indies? Does he know that that's a West Indian accent, or is he just doing a caricature of someone he's seen on TV? That's ignorance, And has anybody actually told that person that actually what you're doing is inappropriate? Or is he just mimicking what he's seen before from generation to generation? So this idea of saying that actually every behavior needs to be labeled, I think we have to be able to distinguish between genuine racism. Now, the way I see genuine racism is with intent to hurt. Those who have organized and orchestrated specific situations with the intent to deny opportunities and to hurt those of a different background. That is organized for me, specific racism, because you being the collective, they are trying to prevent any kind of social advancement of a certain generation based on their skin color. And that kind of hatred, that type of hatred, that for me is the absolute racism. Yes, it's racism. Racist things can be said. We have to distinguish between the behavior and an individual, because an individual can say racist things whilst themselves not being racist. But a racist individual is purely racist. If we look at the ideology of the man, of the last sort of the end of the war, where all of the resources were being redirected to sending the trains to the concentration camps, when actually it would have made more sense from a strategic point of view to send the resources across the west side of the battle for the war to be won. He wasn't interested in winning the war. That wasn't his idea. His ideology, his design was to wipe out the Jewish people. He had no interest in winning the war. Even earlier, we talk about the idea of suicidally attacking the Jewish people. And what did Rashi say? Rashi said that it was like a man who jumped in the bathwater, a boiling bathwater. The bathwater cooled down, but the man got scolded, but he cooled the bath. It's just an ideology. I think we need to understand there are pure and utter people who are against the idea of race. These people are not going to change, and that is pure racism. But there are lots of people, and the vast majority of people are moral, and they're good people, good hearts, but they've grown up in racist environments. They've grown up saying racist things. Their parents have taught them how to say racist things. Those people need to be reached. They need to be educated. So yes, I've had experiences, but I have to differentiate between the experiences that are as a result of miseducation and ignorance, and the ones that are pure. And if I talk about the pure experiences, I think my pure experiences are probably limited compared to the ignorant ones.
Rabbi Shmully.
So I want to say something. I think your point on racism is valid. I think institutional racism is the issue that most come in contrast with. To me, that's sort of the definition of racism. I hold by. Certainly there's prejudice, certainly there's discrimination, and then there's institutional racism. I define institutional racism, and I didn't create the definition, but as having a belief system that one or a group of people shouldn't have access to something, and you're in a powered position to effectuate that belief to ensure that that outcome happens. Institutional racism has taken place in most of the institutions that are built. That's natural, because though there may be one racist person, if that's the term we're using, if he's the CEO or there's 10 racist people and they're all on the board, then not only does no one get hired, who makes it up on the board, the policies, we've seen all type of cosmetics things, t-shirts, things would be offensive, and you could say in the moment like, what was that, or Jungle Boy or whatever, but at the end of the day it came out of an institution perhaps that has roots. Until you uproot the roots, everything that grows, if you just take off the topsoil, what grows will continue to be from those exact same roots. So I think that that's a very important issue. And though maybe all of us haven't encountered every layer of institutional racism, even perhaps from a halakhic or Jewish world standpoint, there's been individuals with experiences, whether it's from getting their children in school or getting a bris or burying their dead, different examples that people have encountered that is worth saying, hey, if we want to make changes, if we want things to be what the Torah says, we should live in a way that supports what the Torah says. And the Torah, not only does it say don't discriminate against those that are less than, it says go out of your way to help, to assist, to be an example of. And so I think it's a short conversation if we hold ourselves to the Torah standard. Now, if we start getting subjective and what I feel like, well, I don't really like this and I don't really like that, well, that's where you sort of get the outcomes that we have, and an argument ensues. But an argument can't stem if one party thinks they want to listen and the other party is willing to speak. So oftentimes, even with, Jodeci example he spoke on was, hey, people asking him questions. And sometimes there's no issue with being asked a question, but when you're asked a question from someone that doesn't even want to hear your answer, they just want to tell you what they think on something, that's very offensive, and that can be exasperating as one is trying to journey and grow and move forward. So I think it comes down to every individual deciding, what type of person do I want to be? When I get to heaven, how do I want my heshbon to be with a Kodesh Baruch Hu? I think of it like this, because it's easy to get into these, well, I pulled myself up, or I pulled myself up, and those examples are used to sort of invalidate the myriads of others that are at the bottom. So that's like me walking through a field where there's glass all on the ground, nothing but glass, but I've got on, steel-toed boots with steel bottoms. So I walk on the glass and I say, hey man, I made it to the other side, and everyone behind me is barefoot. And they say, hey, well, what do you think we should do? I say, hey, do what I did, just walk straight across. The difference is they don't have on shoes. They don't have on shoes that allow them to walk across the glass and not be torn up by the impact to their bare skin. So at the end of the day, if I genuinely say, hey, Reb Shmully, I want you to be successful when you come to Israel. That sounds good as a statement, but if I say, you know what, I'm going to meet you at Ben Gurion, I've got a taxi lined up, I've got an Airbnb lined up for you, yeah, you should figure it out on your own.
but I want to be a part of your success story. So I'm going to go out of my way to try to ensure that you succeed. And that's a completely different tone and vibration. You just say, hey, man, figure it out. Hey, it's all from God, man. Figure it out. At the end of the day, we're called as a nation, not an individual, not a family, a nation. And a nation protects and looks out for its own, and it governs itself by the Torah.
Raphael, I want to make comment on Michael's statement earlier. I think the people who connect to the Torah and keep the Torah should be held at a higher standard. I think if you look at the impact of the Torah on the entire world, the impact the Torah's had on Christianity, the impact that the Torah's had on Islam, you look at the moral, ethical standards of the legislation system over in the UK, which even though the churches did it, they were learning it out from the Talmud. And then we learned here in America, a lot of our judicial system comes from that as well too. So when you look at the impact that the Torah has made on the entire world, we should definitely hold the people who are keeping it, and the people who are learning it, and the people who are teaching it at the highest standard. And the Torah is very specific of the Jewish people being a nation of Kohanim, a nation of high priests that have a responsibility for the rest of humanity. And part of the bringing of Mashiach is the Jewish people, rising to a certain, this is our Masorah, that the Jewish people are to rise to a certain level of accountability in the world. And from that, now that's one point, and I want to hear your response to that. But the other thing I want to acknowledge too is what Jodeci was saying about, dealing with, the cultural differences and being in the Jewish community that way. And I think, we have to be very sensitive about that dynamic, because on one level, like right now, I live in Meir Sharim, right, which is a very Hasidish area, and the oldest religious town in Israel outside of the Old City, and it has a very unique, structure, philosophy, whatnot, and African Americans for sure not a part of that structure. But the thing that I've been able to learn living here for almost 4 years in this area is that why me coming into the Jewish world as a different person, as a different background, Jodeci's a little bit unique because he was born Jewish and he was in grade school, but people who are older, people who converted, why is it such a shock that people are shocked by me coming in? You know what I mean? Like, it should be a certain level of self-recognition that's saying like, hey, you know what? I am different. And other people haven't seen me before. And I don't speak the language. And there isn't any accountability system. And yes, the Torah says 36 times how we should be kind to the ger and these different things. And those things are true. But there is a gap between new people coming in versus my desire to want to be accepted. And I think there has to be a certain level of self-accountability on the Jew of color side to say, like, I am different in these different things. And I do have to, make that maybe a little bit more of an extra effort because of society right now. In a perfect world, like we said earlier, as a world as it should be, okay, fine. As a world as it should be, I shouldn't have to say anything. I come in, they see that I'm a convert, or they guess I'm a convert, everyone circles around me and starts dancing. That's the way it should be. But the reality is that we live in a society where people have been brainwashed with racism. They have been brainwashed to see people as different. There's an economic, there's a political interest around it. And so us coming in at that, we should be the example of saying like, hey, you know what? Like here in where I live at, these people have never seen an African-American convert before. You know what I mean? And my roommates, these are people. So I got to sit down and talk and open up and smile. And even if a guy's a little bit like standoffish, you got to say Shabbat Shalom or Shalom Aleichem, or these different things. And over a period of time, he's still a human being, And so I just think like, yes, for sure, there are people, and you got to separate jerks, like someone who's a bad person, who's a jerk, from the concept from what we live in America, which Zachariah was talking about, which is institutional racism. Like there is design systems. There were rules set in place that Black people and Jews and other people cannot buy property in certain places, and loans, and there are discriminatory processes with home loans and business loans, and it's there to keep a certain group of people in a certain place for sure. So those things do exist 100%. But when I meet a jerk, You know, someone who's not a nice person, someone who maybe had a terrible upbringing, or even a community that a lot of people, you know, especially, you know, here in Israel, you have immigrants from all over the world, from the Middle East, from throughout Europe, you know, different, and they've been through all types of atrocities. And so they come over here, and now we're all in the terrorist Israel, and we're like, oh, well, we should all be connected. And there are people like, no, we don't understand it. We've been surviving for the last 2,000 years in our shtetl, and this guy has been over in his environment in Iran and Iraq and all these different places. And then so all of a sudden, we're supposed to drop our fist or our defense mechanisms and just accept everything. That's a learning process. And so I think there's a certain level of sensitivity and accountability that we have to have as Jews of color, to say like, hey, you know what? The world isn't where it should be, but the world as it is, I have an opportunity to be a light worker within the community and bridge those gaps. You know, I've seen Zakaria here in Israel, and he's made a tremendous amount of inroads with people that have never even met another African American, you know, Jew, and may even have certain even built-in prejudice, you know, about these things. But because of his personality and his outgoing nature and his different, you know, talents, you know, he's been able to do that. And the same thing with Nassim and a lot of other people. And so I think taking the proactive approach as a Jew of color is the most important thing, because we can't wait for people who've been conditioned for 1,000 years or 2,000 years to be separate, to be fearful of change and fearful of difference. We can't expect that to happen overnight. But what I can control is my ability to love my fellow Jew, even with his or her shortcomings, and fight to be a part of that conversation, and fight to be that, because I love my fellow Jew. And I think the power of love is really the shield of David that could allow us to withstand anything that we deal with.
So, and listen, can I real quick? I want to say something, because I think the last. Huh?
Jodeci was going to say.
Oh.
Go on, Zachariah. You go first.
So I just wanted to say, see, I think you made a valid point, and sound bites can be destructive, right? So if someone just takes the last, 30 seconds of that and say, this is what African American Jews said about how you should treat Jews. See, how I've always looked at it as sort of like that run-on sentence, which is, it's on those of us. First of all, Hashem doesn't make mistakes. So if he puts you somewhere, he puts you there for a reason. He puts you in a position to succeed. I believe that. You know what I'm saying? I believe that wholeheartedly in the fabric of my core. I also believe that part of your success is ensuring that the next individual has an easier road. That's essential. So again, maybe I am fortunate enough to make it there with the steel-toed boots, with the steel bottoms. But if I don't clear the glass out of the way, I'm now expecting everyone behind me to have to get steel-toe boots with steel bottoms. Now, unless I brought pairs for them, it creates a unfair situation. So, I mean, for sure, I think anyone that gets sent in singularly, I think there's also another point. Not all African-American Jews are converts, right? So some of what may be, there's a thing they talk about in sports, recency bias. Like, who's the best player ever? LeBron James. And then, 5 years before that, I was like, it's Kobe. Rest in peace. And before that, I was like, it's Jordan. Me, I say Bill Russell. Why I say Bill Russell? He won 11 rings, and as an African-American in Boston, he fought for the rights of the people, right? He was on stage next to Lou Alcindor and Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown. So to me, if you're going to have success, I'm not judging you by your individual success. I'm judging you by what have you done to ensure that those coming after you have an easier way. So the next charismatic or outspoken individual may be successful, but what about the guy that's not charismatic? What about the guy that's not outspoken? What about the guy that's reserved and has his own traumas? We're expecting him to come in, get stared at, respond well to it, smile, greet everyone, say shalom alaikum, and push his way through the system. I think that's unacceptable. I think that, it's easy to deal, and that's one of the problems sort of in institutional racism. One or two exceptional folks or people deemed exceptional is like, hey, well, look at so-and-so. I mean, they did it. Or, hey, and they get all the support and all the encouragement, and then everyone else is held to that standard when that's not a communal model. The communal model isn't, hey, I killed a buffalo. Why don't you go kill a buffalo? It's like, hey, I killed a buffalo. You start the fire. You slice it up. Let's get plates, and let's everyone ensure that we get to eat.
And somebody has to make hamotzi.
I was going to add that Zachariah, just adding on to Zachariah, I think it's a really good point in that I think us four here are quite confident, outgoing people. And when Mordechai says that it's our responsibility to go into communities and to put our effort, I only think certain people can do that. I know a lot of people who are converting, or people who converted, people who that they might not have the confidence to be going up to people and to be making themselves feel welcome and to be realizing that everyone's a human being. And I think we're very lucky. But I think, from my opinion, I think there needs to be effort from both parties. One, as it's very, especially in the English Jewish community, it's not so common for there to be Black Jews. So there are going to be people who don't know, and they don't know how to react to it. They don't know because that's how they were brought up. I understand that. However, someone asked me a question yesterday, a really good question. He said, how come we haven't done this event before the George Floyd thing happened? How come after all these years, and this is how we feel, how come all of a sudden we're coming out about it now? And this is what I think the answer is. League of Nations came about because of World War I and World War II. League of Nations is obvious. There should be all of the countries before, they should have all been together anyway. But only because of World War I and II, they realized they need to form a pact. I see the George Floyd incident as a kind of springboard for communities to look at themselves, for the Orthodox community to look at it. We're in a really good time right now because now the United Synagogue are already doing this event right now. Communities are looking at themselves and saying, we have, Mordechai, I'm not saying we definitely have a responsibility, but now I think it's on organizations as well. I think there's two elements. I think we have responsibility to educate people and to make people more known to us and get ourselves out there. But there's also people that aren't like us. But I think it's on the responsibility of community rabbis to train their CST, to train security. I think it's on the Jewish community to be a bit more sensitive when they meet a Jew of color. I think there's in the education system, Jewish schools. I think there's a lot of responsibility that they need to take themselves as well. Not just
don't skip past that point. I have never seen a Jewish cartoon with Moses or Abraham not looking like Brad Pitt. Now, if you want to say for sure that that's the truth, I find that hard to believe. But it again reinforces issue once you see someone that's different. It's like, whoa, well, how'd you get here? Abraham looked like Brad Pitt, and Moses looked like Brad Pitt, and Aaron looked like Brad Pitt. So who are you, Jewish? You know, so I think that's a very important point that Jodeci raised. And again, to me, it's like this. You know, I come from a sports background, so the presumption is everyone wants to get better, right? So then hold yourself accountable, right? I mean, it shouldn't be like pulling teeth in terms of being better. You know, one thing my mom taught me as a child: you can't tell me how I feel, right? A person's feelings are valid. So at the end of the day, you have to decide, do you want to be the consumer or the producer? You want to be the consumer of the good vibes, or you want to produce the good vibes? So certainly, again, I think people of African descent, largely, I think if we keep using this color thing, it's going to eventually be a big problem. You know, white Jews, to me, that's a way of thinking. So if there's a white Jew, I mean, somebody thinks they're white first. I think that's very problematic. I've heard about Jews, you know, Sephardic Jews, Yemenite Jews, you know, Persian Jews. A white Jew is a way of thinking. If we keep using white, then we got to get to this white-black issue, which then will then cut the check because we need reparations from that war. But if we're just going to go by the Torah and Judaism, then it has to hold itself to that standard. Every person should be able to look and say, hey, we got to hold ourselves to the book. Are we doing our part? And sort of like when they were building the Mishkan, is everyone rushing to bring resources? Is everyone rushing to bring resources? Not want to wait and see how everything shakes out, but is everyone eager to come, help, and support? And right now, hundreds of people watching, and if everyone's asking questions and everyone wants to know what they can do, like we say, keep that same energy. Keep that same energy. I'm like 1 for 60 walking down the streets of Jerusalem when I say Shabbat Shalom back. Now, why did I sometimes not say it? Sometimes I do not say it because I don't want another person picking up issues in Shemayim because they didn't greet me back. But I want to greet everybody. Let's talk. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Now, I will say in London, in Golders Green, phenomenal Yemenite soup, by the way, very warm community, very, very warm environment, very helpful people. I was in America right after the Jersey City shooting and then the horrific incident in Muncie, those attacks. So being a person of melanin walking into shul was very tense and very uncomfortable. And I understand later why I was there. I was there to try to help make it easier for the next person. In the same one person, sort of minority, quote unquote, in the room from an appearance perspective has that attitude, how much more is the responsibility for the majority to meet me more than halfway? The Torah says if you have a friend that always greets you, you should rush to greet them first. So if we've announced, hey, people of African descent and Jews of melanation are going to try to rush to greet you, now can you beat them in the greeting?
Rav Shmully, I want to just jump in on what Jody was saying. So one of the things that I have been doing here for the last year and a half, you mentioned Olagola, but even other rabbinical programs here, I teach a class on cultural sensitivity and diversity, and basically working with the next generation of rabbis to talk about these issues of like, how do I deal with, you know, a convert, how to deal with a bar tshuva, how do I deal with someone who, if I'm in a predominantly, you know, Yemenite or Hasidic community and a new family comes in and they're different, how do I able to meet their needs? If somebody wants to convert to Judaism, how do I deal with them and those different things? And so, and a lot of that education comes from personal experiences. So that element does exist, but I think I just don't know, like in the Jewish world, I think the further a person wants to go, Hashem is going to take them. You know, I really truly believe that. And I believe that, you know, it doesn't matter if, you know, like I started learning in my 30s, you know, and I'm in teaching all over everywhere, you know what I mean? But that was a personal desire. There was no, you know, like, oh, well, you're from Calabasas, you know, so therefore you're going to be successful in the Gemara. You know, that was effort. That's what I wanted to do. I worked on wanting to change myself. I worked on these different dynamics. And so I don't think it's connected to me being a charismatic person or successful in the private sector. I think it has a lot to do with that. And I think there's a lot of other amazing stories. We have Rabbi Akiva. We have a whole lineage of tremendous people that started off nowhere and became tremendously great. And through the effort of personal effort. But, you know, like you said, that there are certain people that aren't that way and aren't this way. But I just think directing that relationship with Hashem, I just don't believe. I believe if I'm around everyone around me, say I'm around a group of people and none of them want me to be successful, I just don't believe that they have the power to stop my success. I just don't believe that. And I think that truth exists for everybody. And I think that outlook could bring a lot of peace to a person and allow them to maintain whatever the process is that they need to go through in order to achieve their objectives. So I think, you know, connection to Hashem and Devekis and clinging to Hashem and these different things, I just think they're important because Hashem made the world to be this way. He made the world to be chaotic. He made the world to be dysfunctional. He made the world this way. You know, as much as we may yearn for this perfect reality, Hashem made a reality that we would have to come back to Him. You know, we would have to come back to His Torah. And I think as long as if we take the responsibility off of the dysfunction of the world, we can accomplish great things with the relationship with Hashem. So I don't know. I just don't believe it. Just whoever you are, I don't care how bad of a situation you're in and how limited resources you are, that if a person truly has desire, that they can make it to the highest of levels. And I think the ultimate level of achievement is peace within oneself.
As Maslow would say, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow would say that the ultimate self-actualization or self-realization. There are some aspects of what you've said that I can get on board with. There are some aspects that I think are different, and what I can acknowledge on the panel, and I hope I can speak respectfully about everybody involved, is that our individual experiences has given us a specific outlook, which, regardless of the fact that we're all black, and actually I'd like to say to the audience that if even though we're all black, we're not all the same type of black, you know.
Wait, Michael.
Black typically African Americans, but then if the Ethiopian situation happens in Israel, they shot a black guy. If a guy in London, something happened to a black guy, and so it's like, you're telling me all these people are the exact same culture? I think that's unfair, and then it does create this, oh, you're black, or then the dark-skinned guy from Pakistan, is he black also? He's darker than me, you know. So I think, and if we keep, I know it's hard because, you know, they say the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. But if we keep on the color thing, it's for sure not going to go away. Now, you know, so, but I know what you meant, my brother.
Michael, I just want to that point is beautiful, and that point should be shared with every shakan in the Jewish world. that all people of color, we're not all the same. We don't have the same experiences. We don't have the same outlook. So matching us up on our skin color is racist, and it belittles the Jewish intelligence and the Jewish neshama and the uniqueness of it. But go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
No, okay, so yeah, no, thanks for those points. So I was acknowledging the fact that we've all come from very different backgrounds, and our backgrounds have influenced our perspective. My perspective is influenced, and as Zaharia said, it's subjective, because it was only when I got into university, and my university was more diverse than any education I'd had to that point, that I realized that there were people of color, black people, coming from different parts of London who did not have the same opportunities that I had. And it was eye-opening to hear some of their accounts. And at this point, I have to acknowledge the privileges that I've had, because this is one of the things that I'd say to friends and who ask me, the $1,000,000 question, what do we do? Because we feel so helpless, we don't really want to go take a placard to central London saying Black Lives Matter, because it doesn't necessarily jive in with who we are as people. But we do want to feel like we're doing something positive. So I say to them, firstly, you've got to do something that you're comfortable with, and something that is kind of fits into who you are as a person. At the most basic level, you can read, you can educate yourself, because I have never known a generation to be so, and I talk about, I don't know how much I can apply this to the general consensus, but I talk about the black community that I know in the UK. My friends growing up did not know a fraction of their history. And the history actually, which may be surprising to a lot of people, the history actually extends before slavery. Now, there's more history than just slavery of the black people. I mean, the black people have been in UK for since the Romans. There are evidence of the Romans being some of the Romans having black soldiers, and then we go back to Egypt, and Egypt is a contentious part because nobody really wants to admit the Egyptians were black, and it's because what does that mean for the wider concept? So we won't go into the details of that, but essentially, I was in Italy recently. We went on a family trip to Italy. We were going through all of the Egyptian ruins. We noticed that all of the Egyptian busts, I don't know how they're called, they all had their noses chipped off. And I asked the curator, I said to him, what's going on? And he said, well, the noses appeared to be too basically black, and therefore we chipped them off so that they didn't have that as evidence that these people were. So if you notice, a lot of the noses of those like the Sphinx, they've become, and that's not an accident. I mean, why would you destroy the nose? Why not the eyes or the paws? Why is the nose covered? Because the nose is what often is distinguished. But these are just, these are societal things. We talk about the whitewashing of history and what have you, but that's the reality. I think what we have to acknowledge is the privileges that we come from. I think I speak to my friends and I say to them, there are certain privileges that you have that I'm not trying to take away from that. That's not fair. You haven't done anything for those privileges. You've got them, but you've got to acknowledge that you benefit from those privileges that we don't. You talk about these aspects. I don't know any of my friends that are not black who can resonate with the idea of going out and being stopped and searched, or driving their car and being stopped, and it's so incredulous to my white friends. The idea is some of the basic things, like I'd say, you've got to make sure that if there are sirens in a certain area, you don't want to be too close, because just by being in the vicinity, you're a suspect. And they're like, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. You didn't do anything. Why? But that's not the point. It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about the profile that you fit being black. So it's these things that I think need to be acknowledged. Is acknowledging the benefits that individuals have, and recognizing that we're coming from different places. I think the community needs to acknowledge that we are not the same people. We're not the same person. I say that with a smile. I get mistaken for so many people. It's actually hilarious. Sometimes I go with it because you have to laugh at some things. Some things you laugh at, and sometimes I challenge. But and sensitivities. Unlike Jody, I don't necessarily mind telling my story, because I find that my story is one that I started off Catholic, really Catholic, and then ended up in Judaism. I quite like it. It's quite romantic for me, and it keeps me believing. It keeps my motivation, keeps the fire burning. But there is one thing that I'd say to Mordechai. You and I think we have a lot in agreement. We agree a lot, but I think there's one area that we differ, and that's the area of and how, and the interaction between yourself, and you speak about Hashem. I had a completely different interaction with Hashem, and I can speak personally, if you don't mind, for a couple of seconds. I've been speaking for a long while. My wife always tells me I speak for too long. Whilst
Love it.
you say about Hashem, you talk about Hashem and giving us challenges. There are challenges, and then there's walking into the fire. And I had a really quite I guess you'd call it like a crisis of faith a few weeks ago, where I had to say to Hashem, and I in davening Shacharis, and at the end I just said, it can't be that you've created us to live in the world as we're living. It can't be that we have to suffer like this on a daily basis, because you know what? Some people are strong. Some people have got those metal cap boots. And some people mentally, day in, day out, are being crushed by what they see, by what they hear, and by what they feel. And you know what? I said to God, you know what? This is not how you promised me I would live. And I said to him, you promised me I'd be better than this. And I've given myself to you in the most way I can. I lay down on that table and I took the knife to my private parts and everything I needed to do for you. And you owe me. So there's a little bit of sorry, I got a bit passionate, but there's a little bit of a difference. There's a difference there, because whilst some people might think that subjective and whatever, I say, God, no, this is not okay, and I will challenge it every way. But I'm not trying to create this discrepancy, or don't want to force people into things that they're not comfortable with. But for me, the ultimate accountability is to God. Those people who consider themselves to be the golden standard and they learn and whatever, they're not accountable to me. They're accountable to God, and let God deal with them, because God is the ultimate judge. All I need to do is make sure I put across myself in the way that is okay, and God will do the rest. And that's my faith. But I don't think it's my business to be calling people out. That's not my business. My business is just to show my experiences, share my experiences, and maybe highlight in a sort of controlled manner my feelings and my emotions. And hopefully, with the grace of God, these people will respond and understand that actually these things.
Michael, I want to respond to Michael. So there's a famous idea. People ask the question, like, why did Hashem make one of the commandments that I should honor thy parents, kiv av v'em? Like, why should I honor my parents, right? Because there's people who grow up in the world that had terrible parents, right? There's people who have families that left them behind, people whose families were abusive, people who've been molested, all types of terrible things happen to people. So why would Hashem make it a commandment that I should honor my parents? In short, because we're in this conversation, the point is that Hashem is teaching us about this concept of entitlement, meaning that the world that we came into, the world that we see, the world that Hashem gave to us is exactly the world that we needed to be in to achieve our ultimate potential, to correct our soul. So the conflicts in the world, there's a lot of conflicts in the world. There's sad things. There's people starving in Africa. There's people, dying in Asia of diseases. There's people, all type confusion, racism, all these different things we're talking about. But the shocking point is that this world is absolutely perfect for all the people, if we're in this world, to correct our neshama. So my approach to life, and it's only through Chazal and our teachers, and the Beis Halevi has an amazing kuntras or pamphlet on bitachon, Amunah, all these different things. But my approach to life is that the challenges that I'm faced with, I have challenges. I have a whole list of challenges. If we went out and we had a beer, I could go through the whole list of challenges. But those are the very things that why I came into this world. And if I can't celebrate that, if I can't celebrate the darkness of the world, even though we want to remove the darkness, but we got to celebrate the darkness. We got to celebrate the pain as well. And I know it sounds such like a cliche thing, but if you're going to do great things in this world, this is the only way you're going to survive. Because the higher you go, the more challenges, the more jealousy, the more envy, the more, different things that come up around you, and people and institutions and these different things. And so if I believe in any of those ideas that these challenges can stop me, I'm not going to achieve my ultimate destination. But, I just think it's a personal, everybody, like you said, everyone's personal, everyone's had different life experiences. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, anyone who's ever become great, forget about this, take Judaism aside. Anyone who's ever done anything great in the world, any autobiography you're going to read, they went up against enormous challenges and things that most of the people who came behind them quit. And like Zakar was saying something about like a village and like the community aspect. But the reality is not everybody's going to make it, not everybody's going to succeed, and not everybody is going to climb the ladder, and not everybody's going to be successful. And that's a part of their correction too. You know what I mean? To have these different challenges and to overcome them. So I think there's a combination of definitely community responsibility, but at the same time, not everybody is supposed to be successful, and for me to project what I experienced in life and what I did and my hard work that I did in life, and to say like, oh, well, you know what, someone else should be able to benefit. I don't know if we have examples of that in Judaism. You know what I mean? I think that there's individuals and there was families and great people did things. I never read about Rabbi Akiva's kids. I never read about the Rav Chaim Vital's children or any of these people. I heard about them. You know what I mean? And I heard about the challenge that they made. And Shlomo Callback, where is it? You know what I mean? So I'm just saying, I think it's an individual thing, and I think even if you took it from a scientific standpoint, you have even Darwin's theory, right? That there's just hunters out there, and there's people that aren't. So I don't know. I don't think that my success as an African American Jew is a gateway for someone else who's African American. Now, it may be a gateway for an Asian guy because he may learn something from me, or a Hispanic guy, or a white guy, or whatever. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if that exists in Judaism. You know what I mean?
Cool. I appreciate that perspective. And shkoyach, I think it comes down to every person's definition of success. So if your definition of success is what it is, blaze forth, go and manifest. Hashem for sure makes the world as he does, and he puts those in it for different roles and tasks. For some, the interest is to be the best davener there can be, and they're in the back of the shul. For the other, it's learning to be able to give halachic rulings to those in the community that may need it, because where would the community be if there wasn't someone to rely on? For others, it's to open up the butchery and the meat place so people can get foods. For others, it's to, so I think the communal role for sure is the reason why I went from a person to a family to a nation. And Moshe Rabbeinu, though he had the most intimate relationship with Hashem, he was the greatest teacher of all because he spoke Torah and taught Torah to everyone on their level. And without such, where are we? We're nowhere. So if it was just like, hey, Moshe, I'm excellent. And no, you could say you didn't hear Moshe's children's names mentioned in the Torah, but I would argue and say, yeah, you did. It's every name after Moshe, right? Because they were all his children. And I think that came out in the parts where it talked about Aaron, Moshe and Aaron's sons. Although they were Aaron's sons by blood, they were Moshe's because he taught them the Torah. So at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of those who learn Torah. It says if a man's learning Torah just for himself, sheesh, and that's not exactly, it doesn't say fish at the end, but that's my, flavor on it. That's my Moroccan spicy fish. However, if one is learning Torah for the sake of refinement and to share and give to others, then that in itself is why we have the Torah. But giving it over to others, they say, should be most visible in your midos, in how you behave and how you act. And that would open up a gateway for someone else. But last I want to say before I give it to the Rav, I think we're speaking a lot, certainly to Jews of color and giving hizuk. But to me, it's not just about that Jew of African-American descent or whatever the case may be. And him, just pushing through and fighting through. It's about that Ashkenazi guy with $400 million in the bank and 3 family trust funds saying, you know what? I want to get a better space in Shemaim. I want to be a part of Michael's story. Michael, I want to support you in your dreams of manifesting your success. And Michael, I want you to identify 10 people from your community, from your background that I can help and ensure privately or publicly to encourage others, or privately for the sake of that might be what you need to ensure that your children have an easier way. And you being a first, generation or second generation, whatever the case may be, I want to be a part of that success. And to me, that was the reason why I was excited being a part of this call. I wasn't really joining this to speak to Jews of African-American descent, because if I did that, I'd have a private call with them, which I try to do regularly. But if we're speaking to the greater masses for understanding, it's not about ridiculing or shame. To me, it's about encouraging and saying, hey, don't you want to be a part of the great success story that's happening? When you think about Mordechai, the other contrast in Mordechai and Megillah Esther, what did he say to Esther as she's sitting up and said, hey, like you said, go talk to the king. She said, it's not a good time, maybe in a couple weeks. And he's like, hey, listen here. Hashem's for sure going to take care of us. He's for sure going to make a way, but don't think you're going to be safe in that little palace of yourself, that little ivory tower off alone, and that it's going to work out well for you and yours. So I think that's a message to all of us. The Mordechai message is, hey, don't think you're going to be safe in that ivory tower by yourself. Make sure you hold it down for the folks. And her response from there was, okay, tell the people to fast, tell the people to pray. I'm going to go holler at the king.
I love you, Zach.
The wisdom here is incredible. there's so many lessons for us that I'm just learning, and in so many areas. And I'm so glad that we've done, that you've joined, that you've allowed us to listen into your conversation. I'm just a little bit wary of the time, so I'm gonna say this. Please God, this session will be available on Catch Up. If you're finding that you need to go soon, you will be able to catch it on Facebook as well as United Synagogue's YouTube. So if you do have to leave because it's getting too long, then please do come back and listen to the rest of the session. I don't know how you guys feel. I mean, for me, the more wisdom I can learn, the more I can listen and understand a bit more. I could go all night on this. So I as long as you guys are available, kind of, and feel you would like to carry on, then by all means.
So I was reading something today in the Torah, and it was dealing in the portion that deals with the red heifer, right? It was sort of breaking down how the red heifer is sort of a biblical moment that doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, why exactly do we need, and those that are coming in contact with the red heifer are impure, but yet then the person that was impure, that then it's like now they're pure. Like, how does that make sense? And it said something very powerful. And if you have an Art Scroll Chumash, it's definitely in there in the footnote commentaries. But it says that sort of the issue with man is that he believes that just because he doesn't understand truth, that it's not truth. And in essence, the truth is, just because you don't understand the truth doesn't make it any less true, right? And so there's all kind of truths, and I think it's easy to sort of put oneself in a bucket or in a tranche and live in your truth. The question is, what type of Yid do you want to be? What type of Jew do you want to be? What type of light to the nations do you want to be? Do you want to be a light that compels others to spread more light? Or do you want to be a light that says, you know what, I'm going to tuck and hide my flame, or I'm going to be used as a divisive light, or I'm going to use a light to discredit others, or I'm going to be an alienating light? All those things are open to anyone to choose. For sure, we have to pay the tab, though, when we get to heaven. So there was an interesting story I was told about a gentleman, and certainly I've modified it for my own sort of vernacular articulation. But it said this guy passed away, and he's up in Shemaim, and he's in the waiting room. And one of the attendants came out to him, and they said, "Hey, man, did you bring any money with you? You have to clear your tab. You can make it up, And he said, I got $100 on me. And he's like, are you sure that's going to be enough? And he's like, yeah, for sure. All I've ever done in my life is steal one candy bar. One candy bar. Only thing I ever did wrong my whole life. So he gets into the room with the boss. The big guy says, hey, here to, sort out your matters. And your tab right now is $2 million. The guy's like, what? $2 million? Only thing I ever did was steal a candy bar. He says, is that what you thought? See, the store owner saw you steal the candy bar, and he let it slide. But his wife was watching him see you, and she lost respect for him because he let it slide. His son was watching his mother, and when he saw that she lost respect for him, he also lost respect for his father. That led to his parents getting divorced. His wife remarried. The new husband didn't like his son. The son committed suicide. That whole tab is on your candy bar tab. So $100 is not going to cut it. So what does that story really represent? Every single thing that we do reverberates across time. There's a appreciation value that goes for the good and for the negative. The exciting moment to me that if the world is genuinely asking, especially the Jewish world, what can we do now? It's like, hey, if you do good, it's going to ripple. If you stay the same or do negative, that's also going to ripple. So it's on, who do we really want to be? And I think the exciting part is, it sounds like a lot of people are saying, hey, wow, I didn't know, I want to do. And so now it's like, well, let's do. Keep that same energy, because at the end of the day, you can't go wrong trying to do good. You can't go wrong trying to help the person that seems to maybe not know anyone else around. You can't go wrong trying to go out of your way to make it easier for others. And to me, that's for sure the responsibility if you've had individual success. How can you have individual success? The Rosh Yeshiva at Or Sameach says that somebody asked, why are there so many Jews learning in Kollel? He said, why are there so many Jewish millionaires? He said, if you want less Jewish millionaires have less guys learning in Kollel, right? Because that's the direct correlation. So, supporting Torah makes it easier. Supporting those that the Torah tells you to support, opens more brachas.
I'd just like to add to that. I was trying to say, you were talking, Zakaria, about what can we do now. I think as we're getting, it's been a long time, we've been speaking for just over an hour and a half. I think where we should start to direct this conversation is what can the English, American, whoever's watching, what can these Jews do? What are the solutions to the issues we've been talking about? What can people do to actually make a difference? And I've just got a few ideas. I'd love to bounce it off and see what you guys think. What ideas can the people watching us right now? What message can we give them? How can they help? So I've got a few ideas. I think first of all, schools. I think there should be a lot of policy involved in schools, educating young Jews. I think that's where we can make the most impact right now as a Jewish community, to teach young Jews that there are different types of Jews. Education in their system. Teach about the different characters in the Torah that represent different multi-faiths. We can start with schools. Security. They should train their security. The rabbis and the community should train their security. Not obviously they have to profile. Of course they have to profile. But how can they be more sensitive towards me when I'm coming into a shul? How can they ask in a friendly way? How can they make it fair for everyone? I think synagogues need to be influenced. I think the rabbis need to be giving sermons in their community about different types of Jews. Make Jews more aware. And I think this all needs to be underpinned by education, by us coming forward in our community and educating people. But people watching, all I say to you is, when you see someone of a different type of Jew, not just black Jews, but be sensitive. I know Michael saying he likes telling the story. I do like telling my story, but I think being at a Shabbat meal or going to a shul, I don't feel like I have to be in the spotlight. Do you know what I mean? There's a certain sensitivity. You can ask me how I am. If we get close, I'll tell you a bit of my story. Do you know what I mean? But it's just you wouldn't ask anyone who comes into a shul, where are you from? What did you grow up? When did you become Jewish? It's just general social etiquette on a personal basis. You get if a black Jew comes into a shul, hello, how are you? Welcome to our shul. Make them feel extra welcome. Just make them feel good. There's just little things you can be doing. Influencing your friends. If your friends say really derogatory comments or make comments about a black Jew that was in shul, say it's not your business. We don't need to talk about it right now. Okay, that was a black Jew at shul. It's not a big deal. What? So what? I don't know. I want to hear what you guys think as well. What solutions do you think there are out there that I know Mordechai, you were saying that there's a lot of what we can be doing as well. But what do you think the community and the people can be watching it? What can they be doing?
So I actually wrote a list. I had a list that I'd written because I'm putting together some resources, educational resources for that very purpose. The purpose of which being, the idea is that these resources can be shared and obviously accessed, and individuals can get an idea as to what they can do practically. I mean, I held a session this afternoon with a group of young women. Kosher session, obviously. A group of young women.
Obviously.
And we, one of the questions they asked was sometimes we can feel helpless. Sometimes it can feel you speak totally specifically about the black Jews, but I think there is a wider issue for the black people in the community and the extended society. Because I think sometimes it's where black people live in England and London, it's quite often very far away from where Jews live. So you're not necessarily going to come into contact with many black people. And the ones that you do come into contact with are not the types of people that, we're not talking about the doctors and the lawyers and what have you. You're coming into contact with, unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunate, it's just the reality. The reality is you come into contact with the low-skilled people, cleaners and the people of that nature. So the narrative often is, well, if these are the only people that I see of color, then therefore that must be what their level of success is. So I think there's an element of challenging yourself in the wider community, because particularly those people that work in the city will know very well that the city is not, whilst not being overly representing, we're not overly represented in the city. There are still many more people of color accessing those sort of more that corporate lifestyle than I think other people that don't have that exposure realize. So it's just a case of, on the list that I have, there's a case of recognizing that that challenging that belief, challenging those stereotypes, and saying, well, actually, no, not all black people are cleaners, and not all black people from Africa. That's I mean, originally all black people are from Africa, but some of us spent a couple of hundred years on different islands in the West Indies, courtesy of the British, and so we're not all necessarily culturally the same. We've got very different cultures, because when we went to the West Indies, this is a 2-minute history lesson. When we went to the West Indies, we sort of absorbed a lot of culture from the indigenous tribes who were Native American in their sort of genetics. So we're not exactly the same as others. But I've said that point before. So in terms of specific things that can be done, practical things that can be done, the first thing on my list is as it's a 5-part list, is educate yourself. Read about, research. There are a number of books that have been suggested in terms of, to get yourself a background, to get yourself educated on what the issues are, so you can get a better understanding. So when you're speaking, you're not speaking from the point of hearsay or generational institutional prejudice. You're actually speaking from the perspective of knowledge. So educate yourself is the first point. Secondly, echoing what Jodeci said, challenging yourself and others, challenging those views. Sometimes I have students say to me, "Oh yeah, but this person was Arab, so he must," and I'm like, that's unacceptable. That narrative of the Arabs being it's absolutely unacceptable. And that has to be, you have to challenge those perspectives. And people are strong, people have got their beliefs, but you have to challenge the narrative, because that narrative is incredibly dangerous, and it can become rhetoric. We all know where rhetoric leads. So share your experiences, share what you've experienced, and ask for help. If you've experienced things and you say, I don't know, you might have been at work and once somebody said something at work, you don't really know how to deal with it, contact someone, ask for help, communicate with people, connect with people, ask people. There are people out there that, we're not talking about being best friends. I think there's a fear here. There's a fear that, all of a sudden the community is going to be overrun, and that's not going to happen. What we're trying to say is having a respect and an understanding of all of the community, the wider community, not just the Jewish community. So there's sharing the experiences, trying to connect with people. We're not trying to have pints and whatever. It's not wider than just trying to connect and understanding where people are coming from, walking their shoes to someone like that point. Engage in discussion. The next point is engage in discussion. Some people feel as if, we're not black, so we can't talk about that. That's absolute poppycock. You can speak on these things. If you have a point to make the point. If you feel like you have an opinion, be open to hearing people's feelings, because as Zakaria said, the way people feel is their feelings. I mean, you might think that they're not justified, but you can't really tell somebody how to feel. And if you don't know that now, you're definitely going to find out that the hard way. And I think the last one is modeling the values. Model the values. If we have very strong values which have been echoed in multiple ways, I think we need to model them in our society so that wider society can see the standard that we set for ourselves. I don't think we should. I've got to disagree with Zakaria. I do not believe in reparations at all, and also I don't believe that Ashkenaz or Sephardi.
Well, I'll take your check then. I'm gonna take your check. Thank you.
No, I don't believe that the Ashkenazi or Sephardi billionaire needs to be living on handouts. I'm not interested in living in handouts. That's not something that interests me. I think if you want to draw for true equality, what you need to do is teach the man to fish, not give him any. I don't want any fish. I want you to give me a net and let me have an access to the ocean, and I'll fish on my own fish. I don't need handouts. I don't need your money. I don't need your well wishes. What I need is the equal opportunity. I need opportunities to be able to excel to the highest of my ability, and I'll show you what I can do. But don't try to I don't need you to kind of give me your handouts, pity, charity. I don't need that. I need to be given the opportunities to excel, and those are the things that I think are in terms of practical things that can be done.
Yeah, and I guess to answer Josie's question, again, like I'm saying, I'm teaching a course in sensitivity and diversity and all these different things, but that's something that I came up with. You know what I mean? That's something that I saw was a need in the community. And I think one of the most damaging paths that I've seen people take in the community is being one of a receiver, one of entitlement, now that I'm Jewish, or I bought tshuva, or maybe I grew up in the community, I should have X, Y, all these different things. And I just feel like it's a very destructive mentality, and those needs are never going to get met, because Hashem created the world in a certain way that we have to connect to him. You know what I mean? We have to get our sustenance through him. And so I think as much as you could ask the Jewish community, I think it's common sense to have basic, levels of Derek Eretz, in terms of being, sensitive to people and environments and respectful to people as they come into shul. There's a reason why the Torah, the most repeated mitzvah in the Torah is being kind to the stranger. You know what I mean? And there's different aspects. Each time that is mentioned, there's a different expression of Shlomo. Anyways, but there's a different aspect of community character that is expressed in an individual character that's expressed in each time that mitzvah is repeated. But I just, again, I don't know. I just feel like we create the world that we want to experience. You know what I mean? And we're just once you have the Torah, there's nothing that can stop you. You can change an entire country. You can change an entire continent, and you don't need anybody. You just need you, Hashem, a wife, children, a Shabbos table, and if you have that, there's nothing that you're a king, in the world in terms of the Torah's perspective. So as much as I could say, it'd be nice, like I said, if like people were maybe like less resistant, but why did the people get to that place? What if they had to endure throughout their lives, throughout their history, that their resistance, or maybe they may have a negative outlook or a negative expression or something dysfunctional about their behavior? How did they get to that place? Like how much, I had a roommate of mine years ago, and he said something to me. He was just like, wow, he's just like, it's so crazy that you're coming into the Jewish people like at the end. We've been through so much. We've been through all these different things, and you're kind of like coming in like carte blanche. We have Israel. We got these amazing yeshiva systems and great Rabbanim. And I think it's something interesting, even what Jodeci was saying, when you look at the issues that the average person of color has from lower economic environments, we're not even in that conversation. We're talking about people being nicer to us when we walk into a place. We're talking about people not asking us for our story, every time we go somewhere. So we have to feel very lucky and privileged that these are our problems. You know what I mean? Because there's much very, very serious things that people are dealing with in inner city communities around the world, people of color, and as much as the Jewish community, definitely, I'm in Israel. That what you're talking about now, and this is why it can't be an African American issue, because this is an issue that exists amongst Ashkenazi and Sephardim, Hasidim, Mizrahi, in Israel is different than America. This is an overall tikkun, correction, that the whole entire Jewish world has collectively, and we're coming into it and we're like, whoa, but this has been going on. There's kids that aren't allowed into certain schools because they're Sephardic. Then there's certain kids that aren't allowed into schools because they're Ashkenazi. This is not a black issue. This is a Jewish issue, b'chal, the whole situation. And it's like, the problem is, and the same thing about police brutality in America. If we make it into a black issue, you're never going to be able to solve it, because it's a white issue. White people in America deal with police brutality. White people are murdered. Hispanic people deal with, I'm from Los Angeles. Hispanic people are murdered. And as long as we allow the media to make it into a black issue, there can never be a unification point to rectify the issue. And I would caveat that to the Jewish community, the same thing. If we make the cultural differences, or the trendy word racism, if we want to make that an African American experience, then the community can't look at themselves as a whole. And when we look at each other as a whole, that's when changes could happen. So I would say in closing that getting out of the media narrative of who we are as people and how we should look at the world, and look at it from a Torah perspective, meaning that, or a Talmudic perspective, meaning that Akdus, unity, is the goal, right? The Jewish people, Michael talked about Mount Sinai. That was according to our sages, that moment in history was a time where it was the most human unification in human history, and it hasn't been that level of unification since then. And then right after that, we did fall. But the point is, at that moment, so we are capable of such things. It is a part of it is in our DNA. But I think it's important to just get out of like the victim mentality where it's a black thing and poor us and we're up against this. No, this is a Jewish issue. It's a Jewish issue within the Ashkenazi community. within themselves. It's an issue within the Sephardic community amongst themselves. And now you have B'nai Menashe and other people too. So I think the more we put the responsibility on the Jewish community as a collective, and we have a voice and we're experiencing it too, but let's not let our issues dominate the entire narrative.
I appreciate that. I'm glad you brought up police brutality because, I've lost guys to the police. So I think just because some things are uncomfortable, or again, I think no one's trying to speak to invalidate another's experience, but for sure, just since we have to touch on it for those that don't have the education, post-slavery, you had the 13th Amendment, which quote unquote abolished slavery. That document said, and though I did go to law school, this is really probably the only piece of law I know, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except. Now, any document that abolishes something and has the word except within the first 5 to 6 words means it's not abolishing something, it's creating an exception. So it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except for the commission of a crime duly convicted shall be permissible in the United States. That was targeted at Black people. What'd you have since then? You had policing. What'd you have after that? High crime. So to say the police issue versus Black people not being correlated is asinine and contrary to the legislative documentation that's available to everyone on the internet, in textbooks. I think there's even a movie about it on Netflix called The 13th Amendment. I know it seems crazy to think if I told you, hey, I've been stealing you from years, and I'm going to write a paper that says I'm never going to steal from you, and it says I'm not going to steal from you again unless I run out of money or unless I have something that I really need that's important to me, you'll know that I didn't write a document at all saying I'm not going to do something. In terms of solutions, I think if the next 30 years of Jewish literature and comic books have various shades of people, but primarily going from darker to light, there still won't be enough curriculum out there to make sure that children aren't surprised when they turn 25 to see a Jewish guy walk in the shul. Why is he maybe surprised? Well, even if someone didn't walk in the shul before, he should be seeing in his little textbooks and coloring books all through his life. So I think that's very important. The academic representation for children is essential, right, to ensuring that adults are well-versed, as well as a communal perspective to say, hey, for example, if we have resources, the reflection of a nation is not on its strongest, but on its weakest. So if we say, hey, there's specific groups or demographics of people that aren't as strong as the rest of us, it's say, hey, what can we do to strengthen that? And Michael, I think you're right. First of all, you brought up black and white, and I said if we do black and white, then there's obviously old reparations, but that's dealing to the whole black thing. If we're talking about Judaism and Jews of various African descents, I think it's, again, from a perspective, who wants to be a part of the success story? In most parts of the business world, they call that an investment. Now, investment is different than a handout, because even if you say giving you a net and teaching you how to fish, some would say that's a handout too, but it's a handout via an investment that allows you to then go on and succeed and put you in a position to succeed. So I think investing in the communities of color in the Jewish community will be a light unto the nations to say, hey, though we might not have done X, Y, and Z, a person that wants to do good doesn't focus on the bad that they didn't do. They focus on the opportunity for good that there is. So when I see people in Yerushalayim that are asking for tzedakah, I'm not saying, well, I didn't take any money from the guy, or I didn't fire the guy, or why doesn't the guy just figure out how to go out and get a job? I say, wow, this guy's giving me a chance to fulfill a mitzvah. Here's some shekels. Right? That's the opportunity that I want. So I'm just sharing that verbally if others felt trepidatious. And again, if Michael doesn't want, and Mordechai doesn't want, and Jodeci doesn't want, I for sure want, not for me, but to distribute it to those that do need. And so that to me is an important part of us all looking good together, and collectively our success and our strength speaks to the nations. Anything other than that looks compromising. Just like when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to the mountain and Hashem said, you know what, I'm going to wipe them all out. And mind you, Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't the biggest social or fan of the people guy. But at that moment, he said, no. If you take them out, take me out also. As in, he rode with the people, because the people's success is ultimately the legacy.
I just want to say to everyone watching, like, I love you guys. And we're one big community. Like, I like to be positive, and I think, like, I think of a car. There's different color cars. You get Ford, you get a black car, green car, yellow car, right? But it all has the same engine. At the end of the day, it's just 1% of our whole bodies are skin color, and I think we need to leave with the message of like love. That we're Jewish people. We love each other. We love everyone. We love you guys, and we're not saying all of these things out of like anger. We're saying them because we really believe in the community. We believe in you guys to actually invest, make change, educate. I think all of us can agree that we love the Jewish people. We love people in general, and we're only saying this because we really believe in the community, or we wouldn't be here in the first place. I don't know.
Hey, Jodeci, I just want to just make a point. For sure, police brutality is a huge issue in the African American community, but I think the point that we're talking about was a solution, right? So we get it. People are being murdered. I'm from LA. We had the Watts riots. We had Rodney King. We made the whole thing famous, right? But the point is just saying that the solution in the situation is to expand the idea of why it's happening. And it's an economic issue, and it also is affecting poor whites, and it's also affecting poor Latinos. And if you want to change, say if it is a constitutional issue or a legislation issue or a voting issue or a court system issue, you need a collective group of people. And I feel like the African American community has continued to suffer from this because they've just been on this isolated island dealing with this issue. So I just think as a person, who's been involved in a lot of different things, that looking at things as a collective, and I think you could take that same idea into the Jewish community and say, if we isolate, like say the quote unquote African or African American or dark person, Gerim or Bachuva, whatever way, if we isolate that experience from the collective, we're not going to be able to collectively make changes. So I just think my point is, in terms of the community, in terms of the outcry, is to say, like, as a community, we have to do, if you want to use the word racism, I like to use cultural differences, because racism is what my grandparents dealt with in the United States, and they were hung, they were murdered, and it was like a sport, it was like a festive thing, you know what I mean? And so that level of hatred, that's how I understand racism. Someone not being nice in a shul, or someone asking me if I'm really Jewish, I don't think I could call that racism. I could call that a cultural difference that socially is not correct and counterproductive. But I think looking at the issue collectively as a collective community, whether it's Sephardic with Ashkenazi, or the different dynamics within the Ashkenazi and Sephardic community, Gerim, all that, I think we're all in it together. And I think when we look at our collective pain together and our collective sadness, that's how we could make changes in the Jewish world and outside of the Jewish world.
Amazing. Okay, so I think we're coming towards the end of our discussion, and I said that we're going to have just just a quick summary of events and what to take away. I'd like to echo Jodeci's sentiments about the love for the community. Those of you who read my article, I've had a whale of a time, thoroughly enjoying my time in the community. It's been overwhelmingly positive for the most part. A few incidents, but for the most part, overwhelmingly positive. I'm in an incredible environment at work. I've got the boys that I mentor and I'm with, the boys that on a daily basis, an incredible place to be. Any of you guys are considering to send your children, has many in the school to consider it. It's in a wonderful, wonderful environment. And generally, I'm just having the most wonderful time. I'd like to thank Shmully and everybody else that's come onto the panel. Thank God for everything that, he's provided, Parnassa and everything else. I'd like to thank my wife for giving me the wonderful support and the ability to be able to do this tonight. So thanks to everyone. And I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in the future at some point.
Likewise. Zachariah, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, shout out to Minneapolis, shout out to the Aisman family and so many there that supported me on my journey. The Kravitzes, the Weinbergs, shout out to Brooklyn and the amazing community that embraced me there. Shout out to Lachava and Shachar and Yonatan and so many others that have given me hizuk on this journey. I really appreciate Jodeci. And again, I want to reemphasize something. I speak from a perspective with a certain assumption. The assumption is that everyone wants to be great and everyone wants to be a part of the success story. So in that, it's not a matter of forcing one to or making one to or shaming one to, but it's from the spirit of wanting to and rushing to do. They said we should rush to do a mitzvah, and it's a mitzvah to strengthen your brother. It says if you see a brother that may be in need and you could give to him to keep him from his business going out of order to keep him successful, that'll help. So I think there's a lot of Jewish businesses that could use support, of different shades and perspectives. But again, right now we're talking about this one, and I think it's got to be established that if we're going to correct things and make changes, we have to start somewhere. So we can't start by saying, well, I mean, we really should do everything. Well, we can't do everything at once. So we start with one thing at a time. And fortunately, right now, what's on the forefront is, African American Jews, Jews of African descent in England, female Jews of color that need representation and issues to be able to speak on. And I think that right now we're not looking for those who don't want to be a part and don't want to help. I don't think there's really many of those out there. I think everyone does want to help. And this call was about figuring out how and ways to strategize and align. And so I'm excited to see the steps that'll come out of this. And again, I want to reemphasize, Michael doesn't want any money. Mordechai doesn't want any money. Jodeci doesn't want any money. I am treasure for the people. Get in touch with me. We're going to get it to the people.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, Michael, Mordechai, Jodeci, Zachariah. For me, this has been a tremendous 2 hours of learning so much. And I know there is so much more to learn. As kind of you mentioned before, it's not about representing, because every individual has a different experience. So from my point of view, I think this was a first step and should be viewed as that for us and everybody watching, to not just watch this and be impressed and then take that and do nothing, but rather to start educating ourselves more, to listen more, and to start educating others, and to start trying to do our part towards Tikkun Olam, towards making this world a better place with equal opportunity for everybody to the best of our ability. Judaism it teaches a tolerance. It teaches everybody's B'Tselem Elokim, everybody's made in the image of God, and we have to look to accept people for that and for nothing else. So thank you once again for joining us. I do hope being gifted this platform through United Synagogue, which, by the way, thank you very much, Richard Verba, for dealing with all the technicalities, despite several close calls. I do hope to open up this conversation further and hopefully represent different people further. But again, not to represent views, but rather for us to hear more and to understand more. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching in, and looking forward to learning more, understanding more, and hopefully working together towards a better world.